All right, hello everybody. This is the first video with regard to fabricating a custom low mount alternator bracket. And let's sort of do a quick status on where we're at. I mean, we are inching forward to completing all the custom fabrication in order to get the LT4 in the Superlite chassis. And the goal was not to have to modify the chassis, and I think we're going to realize that goal. So here's the front engine mount that we built quite a while ago. The last video we covered the rear engine mounts. Then what we did was we had a swap where the alternator would normally be on an LT4, it would normally be up here, but because the alternator's too wide, it would hit the frame. So I substituted the compressor where the alternator would normally go, and we built up this custom aluminum bracket. And now let's see, we also put the pulleys on for the supercharger belt, so you can see those mounted. It looks quite cool at this point. And then this is the area where we have to put a belt tensioner and also the bracket to hold the alternator mount. So I'm going to segue over to the work table and I'll show you which, what parts we're dealing with. Okay, so these are the parts that are going to need to be married together and then installed in that lower portion on the passenger side on the LT4 to relocate the alternator. So this is a stock LT4 wet sump alternator. You see it's missing the cover on the damper pulley. That's a whole nother story, but you'll see the unfortunate incident in another video, but I digress. All right, so here we go. So we've got to marry these two together. This is the pulley tensioner for the accessory belt that will wrap around the compressor, the alternator, and also the water pump. And normally this particular bracket is used to connect to the stock LT4 compressor, but we need to fabricate up a bracket that marries, this particular bracket for the tensioner to the alternator. So, in typical fashion, what I've been doing is doing some arts and crafts, and I started out, mocking up something along the lines of this shape. So this is just some painter's tape with a little craft paper on the back, and this is really the start to the design that I'll use to connect these two together. So I'm going to segue over to a mocked up plywood version of this thing so you can see how it all fits together. Okay, so this is the mocked up plywood bracket. This is actually the third prototype. I will tell you, I've spent a lot of time just trying to get this shape right and get the alternator as close to this this tensioner pulley bracket as I can, because it turns out there's really not a lot of room in the lower subframe. There's less room in the lower subframe than the top frame, but hopefully this will do the trick. So this is basically going to bolt up to that tensioner bracket in the same way that the stock LT4 compressor would. And then I basically made these side pieces, and it'll slip onto the alternator very similarly to the way the stock alternator mount works. So this is going to be a thick billet piece. I'll machine this out. That'll actually be the next video. So anyway, let's bolt it up and let's see what it looks like on the engine. That'll be the next segue. Okay, well, this is what the alternator and the bracket look like mounted on the LT4. I have to say, it looks pretty damn good. Actually, if I zoom back here a little bit, once that's out of billet, it'll complement the bracket that I made for the compressor quite nicely. So let's take a peek around the side here. All right. Sort of hard to get a good angle on it, but you know what? There's plenty of room between the back of the alternator and the exhaust header, so it won't melt that back cap. The other thing to notice is You can see that the alternator is inboard a little more than the compressor, but not by a heck of a lot. Plus, you got that post sticking out of the side, the charge post. So, originally I didn't think that I'd have to put the engine back in the car, but, if we take a look at the frame, that lower frame member is on an angle, so it's sort of hard to know how that's going to mate up to the alternator, and also will that charge post interfere with the frame. Also, I need to make sure I can take the alternator out, that there's enough room between the frame and the alternator just in case I need to service it. So we're going to have to put the engine back in the chassis and see if the alternator fits. So that'll be the next segue. Okay, well, I wasn't really planning on having to put the engine back in the car, but I wasn't sure if I had enough clearance for the alternator and the bracket that I designed. So better be safe than sorry. It's probably going to take 15 hours to machine up that aluminum hunk of aluminum to make the alternator brackets. So I didn't want to spend all that time, and also the aluminum is about $100. So spend all that time and money only to have it not fit. So let's segue over and see if the alternator does fit in the chassis down below. Okay, well, I'm happy to report that I actually do have enough room for the alternator, and I even have enough room for this charging post to clear. So I'm pretty happy about that. I still may wind up reclocking the alternator and put this post down below just to, this is going to vibrate a little bit, and it's probably a little too close. But the good news is the bracket I designed has plenty of clearance. So the next thing I have to do is just start machining this block of aluminum and turn it into an alternator bracket, and then I could say mission accomplished to get the LT4 in the Superlite coupe. Thanks for watching. Bye.